to this week's training. I'm here. My name is Sarbjeet. Guys are watching this training in Business Analyst in Demand, either Facebook group or YouTube channel. The name is the same, Business Analyst in Demand. This week's topic is how to write complete user stories. This is round two for me. We did the same topic last week, but I felt like it wasn't 100% complete. So we're doing this all over again. If you have questions, let's save them towards the end. And then I'll get to your questions. If you're watching this either on a replay or on YouTube, leave your questions in the comments and I will get back to them. So today I want to talk about user stories again in the Agile environment. As we know, Agile is the new upcoming software development methodology of choice. There's many benefits to using Agile. One being that it's very nimble and flexible, meaning that if we're developing a software or a new product, typically we don't know, where it's going to lead to. Most of the time, we know typically just the MVP, which is a minimal viable product, which means that we want to develop and release to the market something that it's similar to the market, but it's going to let us launch. And as we launch our product, we can continue to go back and build it in smaller pieces of with smaller pieces of functionality or features, right? In the waterfall scenario, which is the most common one in the past, is a most linear approach. So when we were developing software or tools or products, our typical development looked like 6 to 18 months, because what we were trying to do was trying to group lots of the functionality, the most important functionality that we needed to launch in the same release, which caused, again, as you can understand, with Agile, our sprints are typically 2 to 4 weeks. Doesn't mean that we're launching every 2 to 4 weeks, but we're building a working piece of functionality in a 2-week cycle. So in the waterfall, where our projects typically were, 6 months to 18 months, in Agile, our typical releases typically are a month and a half, or 2 months. So that's the difference. The biggest difference with Agile in Waterfall is the smaller release of functionality. So with that said, in the waterfall scenario, when we gather requirements, our format is the system shall do some functionality for our users, right? And in the Agile environment, because it's very user-centric, our framework, the way that we capture requirements is in user stories. So we'll go through the format of how you create user stories, but there's more to that than that we'll cover in just a few minutes. So first, before we talk about the format of user stories, I want to talk about the progression of user stories. So when we first start talking about creating either our MVP or anything that's in the release, we have something called a product backlog. A product backlog is something that our product owner, our stakeholders, our Agile team, which consists of a Scrum Master, a product owner, developers, our QA folks, our UX designers, and maybe even stakeholders can be invited as a project team. We as a team define what the next set of functionality is going to be in a release. So typically when we define things that will go into a release, we take things from the product backlog, which are called user stories, which we'll cover next. So when we have user stories that are prioritized to go into the next sprint, they need to be complete user stories, which is what we're going to cover in the next few slides I have for you guys. So typically what you've seen in, I'm sure throughout the business analyst domain, there's many Facebook groups, many YouTube channels, lots and lots of articles. But what I've missed is from user stories, in reading and understanding all of the content, is the acceptance criteria from a user story. And we'll cover those next. And that's what I missed to cover last week. So we're doing that again here, because without having a full, complete acceptance criteria, you're really, a user story cannot go into a sprint until it's complete. And having a complete user story means that you're defining your user's action, what it's going to happen, what the expected result is, and a full acceptance criteria. Okay, so with that, let me share my screen and we'll get started. So how do you write complete user stories? This is the format, and I'm sure that you've seen this format many, many times before. Let me move this down here. So the format is as a user, which is your stakeholder. Agile is very customer focused. So a lot of the user stories that you'll see are user centric because we want to create a functionality for our specific user or for our specific stakeholder. So the format is as a user, I want some functionality. The functionality is in this standpoint our desired action so that the acceptance criteria in the beginning when a user story is in the product backlog, it could be very, very generic, right? So for example, we have examples in the next slide, but our acceptance criteria when it's in the product backlog could be generic. The criteria for our user story to move into a sprint that we're going to be actively working on requires us to flesh out our acceptance criteria, which I'll cover in just a moment. So the justification or the acceptance criteria is setting parameters for value or result. It's used for QA testing purposes to create test scripts and test cases. But here in this slide, what I've done is I've given you guys examples of how we would create these user stories. So the first one says, as a patient, I want to log into my patient record from home so that I can check my appointment time. Again, this is high level, something that you would find in the product backlog. As a patient, I want to log into my patient record from home so that I can check my doctor's notes. The third one is I want to log in so that I can look at my lab results. And the fourth one is that I want to log in so that I can send notes and messages to my doctor. So this level of functionality you'll find in your product backlog. But for us to move this user story, once it's, before it's prioritized to move into a sprint, it's very common that we have a fleshed out acceptance criteria. And what does that mean? So first, let's talk about why having a detailed acceptance criteria is important. It's important because when we add lots of detail around what it is that the user is expecting to see, we're giving our developers and our QA folks, along with our UX designers, the ability to work towards completing that functionality completely, right? So who uses it? The acceptance criteria is used by a developer so they know what it is that they'll be coding and what the level of effort will be for this user story, right? So if we're only giving somebody this, I moved on. So if, for example, if I were to give a developer as a patient, I want to log into my patient record from home so that I can check my appointment time, that could be accomplished many, many different ways, right? And looking at that, my developer cannot tell me how long will it take him or her to code this piece of functionality. It could take, because it's not clear. And for that reason, it's not complete because it could, a developer could look at this and from their standpoint, mark it done. And when we go back to check it, we just, that expectation that we have from our users will not be met. So I'll show you what I mean by that. So there's another format. So the typical format that you guys are probably very used to is this for a user story. As a user, I want some functionality so that I can achieve some desired result, right? For us to write complete acceptance criteria, here's the format. You want to write given, when, and then. And I'll use that in an example so you guys understand. So here is a complete user story. As a patient, I want to log into my patient record from home so that I can check my appointment time. Given that when I log onto the portal successfully, right, that's a prerequisite for us to even work on this user story is that our authentication for our portal has to be created and functional and good to go. Given that when I log into the portal successfully, when I see the tab for appointments and I click on the appointments tab, again, another prerequisite, right? So now because I'm detailing this out, everybody that's on the team can visually see what the expected result needs to be. And then the last thing I have on here is, so I'll start again. Given that I log into the portal successfully, when I see a tab for appointments and click on the appointments tab, then I'm able to see all of my past and future appointments. So given this level of detail, it makes it very easy for my developer to give me accurate assessment on how long it will take him or her to code. It gives my QA folks a good understanding of the test scripts that need to be created to test this functionality completely. It gives my UX resources the ability to kind of start doing mock-ups and getting validation from our stakeholders, right? So it makes everything a lot easier when we have lots of details from an acceptance criteria standpoint for a user story. And this makes this user story complete. When a user story is complete is the only time that it could be scheduled in a sprint. In one of our past videos, we talked about sprint planning, and we talked about, you don't ever put user stories in a sprint unless they're complete. And what you're seeing in front of you is a complete user story. I did one more example for this one, and that is, as a patient, I want to log into my patient record from home so that I can send a note to my doctor. And fleshed out, it looks like this. Given that I log into the portal successfully, when I see a tab for email and click on the email tab, then I'm able to see all of my past communications with my doctors and or staff. Then I'm able to select send your doctor a note button on the screen and start composing a note to my doctor. I don't know if you guys can see that. Okay, that's a little bit better. Oops. So there you have it. This is the format that you would have for a complete user story that's required for us to begin a sprint. Questions? Any questions? No?
Yeah, hi Sarjeet. Abhinav this side.
Uh-huh.
So I wanted to ask you this question. The previous example which you gave in that you wrote the acceptance criteria as given this functionality, when this is there, then you are able to fulfill certain purposes. So
Yes.
is there a certain standard that there could be only one given, only one then,
No.
and multiple thens, or we can write in singleton functionalities also?
So you can have a multiple given and whens. So you have to just make sure, right? The goal of a user story is to break up functionality in codable chunks. Codable chunks means that you'll have to work with your developer and say, is this something that is, so I'm not sure if you're familiar with story points, the concept of story pointing, right? Which means that when you're looking at a user story, you want to size it. Is it something that's going to take you like there's different methods. One of it is small, medium, and large t-shirt size. We also give story points, right? Because the goal is not to have one developer build all the functionality. You want to split up the work so that it's evenly divided. And because a sprint is 2 weeks typically, right? Um, if you give everything to one developer, you'll probably have a harder time meeting that sprint. So typically you have 2 or 3 developers on your team and you split up the functionality that way. And
Right.
that's why you want to split up the user story in manageable pieces. So typically you don't want a user story to be more than 4 to it depends on your agile team. So I don't want to throw out a number. But going back to your question, if you're given and then requirements are massive, like 10 or 20, then you know that your user story is very complex and you may want to go back and split up that user story in half, or split it up in a way that it's not so complex. But there's no rule out there that says that you can't have 20 given and then statements. You just want to make sure that you're not making your user story so complex and assigning it to one person that may have a hard time delivering the entire functionality.
Sure, sure. It's more of a purposeful propagation, and it's more,
Yes,
yeah. So it's more towards, how much we are fulfilling the purpose. If it's one or
absolutely.
it's three, and if two things are fulfilling three
Yeah,
criteria, then okay, got
absolutely.
it. Thank you so much.
You can detail it out as much as you need to. Just be mindful if you have lots of things written down then and when scenarios, it could mean that your user story is pretty complex.
Yeah.
But there's no, if you need to write 5 or 10 statements, then go for it.
Okay.
All you're doing is defining the criteria very, very succinctly so that when our developers coding it and our testers are testing it, they have a full picture, right? So going from the high level to the detail, it gives you lots of clarity on what it is that we're building. So estimates are accurate and will not end up at the end of the sprint and realize that we didn't meet our goal for the sprint.
Sure. Totally got you. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So I guess we'll end for today. Let me know in our group if there's other topics that you guys would like me to cover. We've done a few topics on around Agile. I think we did sprint planning, the daily stand up. This one is user stories. If there are other topics around Agile or anything else within the software development domain, business analysis, or even project management, let me know and I'm happy to cover those. I try to do training typically once a week. So I need topics. So let me know what you'd like me to cover. Okay. All right. With that, guys, I will talk to you guys again next week. I hope you guys have a great weekend.
Thank you so much.
No worries.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.